Hello, hello, hello. Hi there. Welcome to Warrior Wednesday. This is our chance here at Kira Grace Yoga where we get to talk to some of our warrior ambassadors to learn more about them, what makes them so special. And today I'm so excited that we are going to be talking to Dr. Ariele Foster. So I'm just going to, there she is. Ariele, if you could go ahead and just request to join me. And when she requests, then I can let her into the room. In the meantime, while she's trying to get into the room, oh, there she is. Yay, hallelujah. So Ariel's joining us now. Ah, there she is. Yay, I was starting to get worried.
Hi, Lisa.
Good, can you hear me okay?
Totally.
That's great. So I just want to introduce you a little bit. I'm going to read this nice little description, and then we're going to jump right in and get to know you a little bit better. But Ariele is a doctor of physical therapy. She's the founder of Yoga Anatomy Academy, anatomy teacher for yogis. She has 2 decades of multidisciplinary yoga. She's a 2-decade multidisciplinary yoga teacher and physical therapy clinic owner in Washington, D.C. So, wow, you have a lot of experience working with the body, both subtle body and physical body. And I'm excited to hear all about that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, so thank you. What I'd really like to start with is to hear a little bit about kind of your origin story. How is it that you got started as a yoga teacher?
I had a little bit of a funny background so in the 80s, so long time before yoga was popular, my grandmother taught yoga at the
Wow.
end of the day to the teachers of my elementary school. So depending on the childcare needs, I think my parents would keep me after school, and I would go to classes with her when I was a little tiny kid. And then I moved away from where my grandparents lived, and I ended up in a high school, a public high school in my new town that did not have a gym. And I was able to take yoga like as a high school student in the mid 90s for gym credit, for PE credit. So that was a little bit of an unusual background. And then when I got to college in the late 90s, I had just this really extraordinary teacher or set of teachers because we had yoga as part of like what you could sign up for there. And she was from the Kripalu tradition. And so pretty much the year that I finished school, I spent a couple of weeks volunteering at the Kripalu Center, which
Oh,
was not
wow.
that far from where I went to school. Yeah,
Wow.
and then
So,
I started teaching yoga that year,
well, that was fast, right out of high school.
right out of college.
Oh, excuse me, right out of
Yeah,
college. Yes,
yeah.
right out of college.
And
It was,
that
but
is,
you goes way, way back, all the way to grandma. So talk about a yoga lineage, right?
yeah, yeah. She's a sweetheart, and she had
Aw.
a lot of yoga
Well,
background.
that is so great. So you went ahead and you were at the Kripalu Institute. And is that where you got your first total yoga teacher training certification?
It's actually not where I got my first because in 2001 the 200-hour standards were relatively new.
Hmm.
And so the first place I got my training was actually a much shorter training than a 200-hour. But I had already not apprenticed, but I had literally lived at this former ashram, which was the Kripalu Center.
Wow.
So I was very studious there. Like every class I took, morning and night, I would take 2 classes a day and go to the philosophy lectures and take all these little clinics in the middle of the day. And I would just take notes like crazy. I still have some of those notebooks. Um, so yeah, then I didn't end up taking the Kripalu training until a few years later, but I had already
Hmm.
been teaching yoga by that time.
Right. That's amazing. So
Yeah.
you were really diving in at that time. What was it like to be living at the ashram?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm just noticing how gorgeous your camera is.
Oh,
I think it's probably your camera. I'm gonna pull
it's
my
my
light
iPad.
closer to
Yes.
me. I'm gonna pull my light closer to me and see if it
You
gets
know,
any
and you can
better.
say hi to your friends as they're joining. There's lots of hearts. I think that's amazing. Thank you,
Oh.
everyone, for joining and showing the love.
All right. Well, okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna unplug it if I bring my light any closer. So we'll just stick to that.
Okay.
Um, yeah. Hi, everybody. I see some folks I recognize and some names that I don't. um, oh, thanks. So yeah. Where were we? The Kripalu is a former ashram. So when I was
Yes.
there, it had sort of pre-spa vibes. Here's what I mean by that. Like
Yeah.
there was no coffee on the campus unless you somehow smuggled it in yourself. There was very little dessert. I think we got dessert once a week.
Ooh.
And
Well, it was
dessert was,
actually like a dessert and not an expectation.
oh yeah. And all I definitely remember um, just looking forward to it so much, and then sometimes they would run out so you couldn't take more than one. I don't even think they had caffeine at the time in the cafeteria. You could buy green tea or black tea from the first floor shop, and that was kind of it. So
Hmm.
it wasn't like today, if you go to the Kripalu Center, I'm pretty sure they have coffee. I'm pretty sure they have
Yeah.
caffeinated beverages. They really
And dessert. Lots of
shifted.
dessert.
And probably it's been a while, but they probably have all that stuff. And then I think that just goes to show like they were in that in between kind of space, and that was a really powerful time to be there. When it was truly ashram or ashramic, I'm not even sure if that's a word, but
I know,
like
that's what I was going
that
to say. Ashramic.
ashram, when it was really really ashramic, there were actually, and I believe still if you go today, there are these two lines for food. So you can
Hmm.
stand and get food from one buffet or from the other. And those used to be divided by sex, which would not fly today and should not have ever flown.
Oh
But
my.
because they had uh, vows of celibacy when it was an ashram, they separated the men from the women. And yeah, they had lots of rules. And it was fun to have like, teachers who their growing up in the yoga world was in that time of it being a true ashram, and they had lots of stories. Now some of them are not as pleasant as others
Yeah.
when they find out there's a little bit of hypocrisy going on, but there were also a lot of like really beautiful stories from their lives, from living such an unusual kind of suspended way, different from the rest of the world.
Right. So interesting. I mean, yes, I've
Thanks.
spent time at Kripalu. It's beautiful and the food is amazing. And I'm not saying this to like plug them. It's just like, yes, that it started out as an ashram and things are so different now in the yoga world that we're living in. There is some tradition, right, that's carried over, some of which is good and useful, and some of which, you talk about in some of your blog posts, which is kind of some stuff that we believe today or that we hear today from yoga teachers is kind of silly
Yeah.
or definitely not grounded in science is a nice way to put it.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so I think a nice way to segue into that is that at some point you decided that you'd like to become a physical therapist. And so why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Melissa, who's here, who was
Yay.
actually Melissa Glenn. If you're here, hi. You were actually in my Kripalu teacher training, so you remember some of those wild stories. Um, and hi to Cameron also. So yeah, I injured myself in a yoga class. Getting right to the point. I
Yeah.
was in a Iyengar style class, holding down dog forever, trying to do all the things, pulling the shoulders away, pushing, blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
And, it was probably not that long of a hold, but it felt like a really, really long hold at the time.
Right.
And the next day or the day after that, I couldn't lift my arm.
Oh,
So I had most likely a rotator cuff injury. I never got it imaged, but it was bad. It was not even a little one. It was a big deal.
right.
And
Yoga's supposed to heal, but here we are.
yeah, yeah. And then for the first time in my life, I saw a physical therapist after that. I feel like, honestly, I feel like we should all see a physical
Yeah.
therapist at age 18, age 21, age 25. If you don't have one, a reason to go, just get checked out. And so I saw one for the first time, and I was around 25, 26, 20. Yeah, it must have been 26. And she primarily treated me with this deep tissue kind of myofascial release stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the clouds parted, my arm was moving. I just felt like I felt like some miracle had happened. And
Right.
to me, it was like the way that she could evaluate me within just a few minutes and see what was going on the inside of my body when it just felt like a huge mystery to me
Mm.
was extraordinary. And so that really kind of sparked my interest in physical therapy. And then it was like a long journey, honestly, a really long journey. And just briefly, um, because I think this is such a present topic, I had moved to Washington, D.C. after undergraduate to work on climate change issues.
Oh, wow.
And what I noticed, like in my heart and my spirit at that time, was what a heavy boulder we were rolling uphill, attempting to roll uphill. And still to this day, folks working on climate. I don't think I had the emotional fortitude in my 20s to stay in that profession.
Mm.
And here we are 20 years later, very, very little change on that front. A lot of
Yeah.
talk right now, not a lot of change. And I, I, I sometimes wonder how my path would have really shifted. But it was because I, I knew I kind of had this sense that I wasn't going to see progress on that front and that was going to wear on my heart, still wears on my heart. But I wanted something really tangible where I could actually help human beings and help people to feel better quickly. Um, I actually wish I didn't have that part of my story. I wish I had stuck with it in certain ways, but I also just truly, truly love being a physical therapist, and I love kind of the way I'm weaving these two things together.
I love that. Well, and
Yeah.
who's to say that you are not going to be involved in some way in the future, right? Like that's a comma, not a
Yeah.
period.
We all
And
should be involved.
I know, really, really. And
Yeah.
you're helping people and and I think sometimes I don't believe like everything in life happens for a reason because I feel like bad things happen
Yeah.
and we kind of just have to choose our responses. But your choice to go into physical therapy was really guided by this experience, like the pain and then the healing experience that you had. And that's powerful. And what
Yeah.
you're able to bring forward to other people, that is so powerful. And I got to say that I love my physical therapist. I love him. He's like, I have spine stuff, and it's actually from a yoga injury as well, from an
Mm.
um, kind of an egomaniac teacher who took me in a place that I wasn't ready for and I did not want at the time, but I was new and very hypermobile, and it was just bad. So here I am, and this isn't about me, but I got to tell you that you go through all of these different places to try to find healing, and it wasn't until I found this physical therapist that I've been able to reclaim my practice and to feel relief in my life. And I
Yes.
think that's really important. I just want to like give a shout out to the PTs, especially Dr. Ariele Foster, because she lives in the land that we are living, that she lives in this yoga world, that she's experienced it herself, like to be injured or, and I want to take you along. I want to hear about your practice, but I also want to hear especially about how you dispel so many of these myths that we hear in yoga. I think it's fascinating. So, leading toward that, putting that out there, why don't you go ahead and tell us about setting up your practice and then what got you to the point where you are now with the way that you are teaching, with your focus on anatomy and just like what you're passionate about today.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say, well, one thing, I keep tapping my screen because it's like going to sleep on me.
Oh
So
no.
I don't know why that's happening, but if you see me fidgeting and moving my arm, that's why. Um, there we go. I'm tapping it again. So the the thing about physical therapy, I think a lot of folks don't know, is when we are, let's say, unshackled from certain parameters that can happen in some clinics, not all clinics. I think we're really the best movement experts out there on the planet. That sounds a little hoity-toity, a little arrogant, but I really mean that. I mean, that's
Hmm.
what we do. We study movement. So chiropractors are great often at movement also, but their real specialty is probably looking more at like how joints stack up one to the next. Um, there are obviously personal trainers who are better at maybe progressive strength training and pushing people to build bulk up. But I think physical therapists, I'm just a big fangirl of physical therapy. I love this profession. I love being able to work one-on-one with clients, and I love the kind of um, how would I phrase it, like the detective work that I do to get to the
Yeah.
root of the issue. And I've worked in a lot of different settings if you include all the clinicals that I did while I was in school or residency type things. But I worked at a couple of different outpatient centers in DC that saw post-surgical clients and then just regular folks off the street who were in accidents or broken ankle or just had some annoying pain that they wanted to get taken care of. And I had some really incredible mentors, especially in the last place
Mm.
that I worked, which was Georgetown University Hospital. And but people were seeing me on the side and the kind of the whole time. And in between like working full time, well, I wasn't always working full time, but working full time and then working part time and seeing clients and teaching yoga and then starting Yoga Anatomy Academy, which I'll get into in a second. I really ended up needing to kind of open my own space.
Yeah.
And so I've been running my own clinic part time for 5 years. And that's awesome. I have so much freedom and um, I really feel proud of the work that I do one on one with folks there on telehealth and in person. And then Yoga Anatomy Academy is this other really incredible thing that I started in 2015. So a lot was happening at that time. And I began running this online yoga anatomy mentorship. I think around 120 people, maybe 115 have gone fully through the program.
Wow.
And I've got another 20 or so that are enrolled for my fall program. And it's just this really awesome mentorship where we do, I've got like an online course, but also a live component where folks can pick my brain about anything, ask me about like how to handle their private clients or
Mm.
what to teach, how to sequence. And so they get this kind of structured thing. And then kind of for life, as long as I'm doing the live stuff, they can join in. So all the people who joined since 2015 can participate in the live office hours. So the yoga anatomy mentorship, yoga anatomy, online yoga anatomy mentorship is really a really cool thing. And in if you were to look at my hourly rate and then look at that, like it's a really phenomenal deal just to get access to um, all of the continuing ed that I'm doing and then having that trickle down to the students. And I am known for teaching about fascia and
Mm.
hips also. I taught 2 online courses through Yoga Journal, and Yoga Journal it was recently purchased by, I think it's Outside Magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they you can't actually buy those courses directly from Yoga Journal anymore, which is a real shame. But
Oh.
up until about a week ago or 10 days ago, you absolutely could. And so I'm trying to work out with them how to get those files accessible to more people because I think especially the hips course just helped so many people. So I'm trying to get that back into the public view. Um, yeah, but those are things I'm really passionate about because in addition to the shoulder injury and healing through fascia release with that, some of which was like my self myofascial release. I also had a big hip injury.
Mm.
And I think yoga absolutely contributed in a lot of ways. It probably wasn't the only thing, but there was a myth that I bought into for a long time that we really didn't need much other than yoga in terms of our movement practices.
Yeah, I
Now,
heard the same thing, all from yoga teachers, of course.
yeah, and it kind of hit me later on where I was looking at like some of the teachers I really admired, like Catherine Budig, who always had a Pilates practice pretty much from the
Hmm.
jump. And there were a couple of teachers who I considered to be really strong who had either an athletic background or were working as personal trainers on the
Yes.
side. And I realized, yeah, this is not a thing. Like, we really do need a lot more than yoga. And so I think for a long time I was quite intimidated. Well, the other thing to know is that in the world of physical therapy, I am a relatively hands-on physical therapist. That's called
Mhm.
manual therapy. And I
Yeah,
think manual
that's what I
therapy is,
like.
it's brilliant. Yeah. So obviously I can't do manual therapy on telehealth, but
Mhm.
manual therapy is, it's profound, the kind of things that shifts that can happen. I'm talking like preventing surgeries, that kind
Hmm.
of level.
Hmm.
And so I'm really passionate about it, but none of it really seals in until it becomes a new habit for the human being who had whatever compensation going for however long, right? There's a lot more to say there, but basically the point is that the thing that really seals it in is retraining your movement,
Hmm.
and then once you've retrained that movement, loading that movement.
Yeah.
Loading means adding weight. And
Hmm.
more research has come out in the 10 years that I've been a physical therapist on the importance of strength training for our bone
Hmm.
health, the importance of strength training for our metabolism, for our brain health.
Yeah.
There has been no real evolution of the research around stretching, period. More and more research supports basically lifting weights
Yeah.
and walking, just general movement and activity. And on balance, there's very little evidence that stretching is going to do things for us, and some reasonable um, hypotheses or evidence that we can actually do damage through overstretching to our joints.
Yeah.
And I believe that that is what happened to me. So that is a lot to unpack. We're not going to be able to do it on this conversation, but
No,
I've
but people
added
can
strength
tune into
training.
you and see the different posts that you do periodically if they're not following you already. First
Yeah.
of all, I just want to give you a shout out that you all should follow Dr. Ariel Foster
Yeah.
because she has all sorts of great content that's up on her Instagram site as well as her website where she talks about these things and gives you tips and the download on why, because a lot of times we know we should do something, but when you know why you should do something, it makes an enormous difference. I think it makes you
Yeah.
much more likely to act than
Yeah.
you can be told and told and told, and then it's like, wow, okay, and here are the results, and you are in fact a living example of that. And I totally relate to you on this particular thing, especially because I'm a personal trainer and I teach, hybrid yoga classes with strength training and TRX. And um, my body felt so much better once I started to strength train. And it's
Yeah.
funny, especially because yogis in particular are like, well, I don't want to get tight. That's what I run into. I don't know if you hear that, but I hear, oh no, I don't want to get tight or I don't want to get big. And I'm like, first of all, y'all, if you're a woman, it's going to be really, really hard for you to get big. Really hard. Um, those women that you see are huge, first of all, aren't as big as you think they are when you see them as person in person. But it takes a lot of different stuff, including sometimes hormones. And then the other thing is that when you and maybe you can speak to this, that if you are actually going through the full range of movement and it's loaded and you're doing it properly, you can actually increase your your flexibility or your mobility. And this is something that I found. I have some of my students who are like, wow, I leave my practice. It's so much more integrated.
Mm-hmm. God, there's a lot of topics there. There might be a little delay
Just
now
choose
between
whichever
our
one you want.
two feeds. Okay. First of all, thanks for telling folks to follow me. Yeah, I do try to put some interesting things on here. Occasionally an inspirational quote, but that's the minority of my posts. It's mostly I'm trying to put stuff that's useful for folks.
Yeah.
And then I also post over on Yoga Anatomy Academy, all one word, so you can follow that. Yeah, let's talk about tightness, because I think it's just so really, really relevant. A lot of tightness can happen because can occur because that part of your body is not moving well. It's not because it has more muscle bulk. So there's a difference between something called tone and tightness. Tone is when you feel your arm and it's rock solid. That's like the very muscular arm, versus when you feel the arm and it's squishy. That's tone. That's called resting tone. But tightness is subjective. Whether your arm is squishy or hard as a rock, you can have tightness, because that's just your brain's interpretation of what's going on in the body. And I cannot tell you the number of people who've told me their hamstrings feel tight. They lay on their back, one leg lifts up, and it's 90 degrees, which is above average. So those folks do not have objective measures of tightness, but they may have tightness because the brain is trying to stabilize joints that are hypermobile. So in addition to fascia and hips and a little bit around shoulders and strength, like hypermobility is something that I've been talking about for years. And I run a Facebook group called Yoga for folks with hypermobility and or Ehlers-Danlos. So Ehlers-Danlos is another subject, but one of the subtypes of Ehlers-Danlos can be hypermobility. And so for a lot of us coming to the yoga mat, we don't necessarily have a clinical diagnosis of hypermobility. But I would say a good 80% of people who stick with yoga and stick to it have some level of generalized hypermobility in their body. Because when you don't, very often yoga becomes unpleasant and you don't get a positive feedback loop from it.
Right.
But if you have a lot of hypermobility and maybe you never did well in other types of movement because it required strength or demands of coordination that you didn't have because of your loosey-goosey joints, you come to yoga and you get that sort of positive feedback loop, and then you keep coming back. And so folks with hypermobility are really prevalent on the yoga mat and need more stabilizing than anybody else, because we feel tighter. And this is the tricky thing to wrap your mind around. We often feel tighter because we have our brain sending more signals to those muscles to tighten up, to protect loose joints.
Right.
At least that's the working theory. And really the way to calm that whole process down is through strengthening. So if you can get the resting tone of a muscle, the upper traps is a great one to talk about when it comes to this. So for a lot of us yogis, we've always pulled our shoulder blades down and away from the ears. And that is usually not something that we need to be doing, and often something that can be overdone and can end up yanking on the nerves. So shoulder blades should actually be able to go through this full range of up and down, especially in down dog when the arms are up overhead. And once you start using your upper traps, very often you'll feel less tight there. And the last patient who came to me and was like, I feel really, really tight there. I put my hand on that muscle and it was nothing. Like there was no muscle. It was just like you're tight because you don't ever use this part. And so once you use it, blood flow comes in, good things happen.
Love that. Well, thank you. I know there's so much more that can be dug in. And so that's why I think it's important, if you find this interesting, and I know that many of us do, that you can go to Anatomy Academy and learn more about it. And maybe even, especially maybe you're you're a yoga teacher and you could go ahead and sign up for her courses, and that mentorship sounds amazing. It's so hard to find good mentors and to get real time with them. So I think not only are you getting the education, but you're also getting that one-on-one time with Ariele. And I think that sounds amazing. Um, Really quickly, there's one more question, and then we're going to go to the warrior question.
Sure.
Um, I would like to hear about your nonsense yoga. Talk to me about what you're doing with this nonsense yoga.
Yeah, so I recommend folks go to my story, like my Instagram page, and there's a thing called story highlights, which are the circles with collected themes in them. And one of my story highlights is called nonsense yoga. There is just so many cues out there in the yoga world that really don't make any sense if you step back, think about it for a couple of moments. And I started to get some advertisements in the last 6 months, probably longer than that, but I just started collating them in the last 6 months or so, last 3 months, and calling them out, just kind of
Hmm.
giving more of an evidence-based point of view, because I think there are a lot of people who are extraordinarily confident in the yoga world that their style does this or does that or helps you, whatever it is, from lose weight to fix your fascia to fix your low back. And it's just really unrealistic. A
Hmm.
lot of the things that folks claim in the yoga world. And so coming at it with a much more evidence-based practice, I think or evidence-based lens is really, really helpful so that we don't, as largely women, waste our money, waste our time,
Yeah.
kind of trying to grasp at straws in these different styles of yoga and taking all these different trainings, buying into all these different things that at the end of the day don't have good evidence that they're going to move the needle in our body.
Mm. I like that.
Yeah, so
So
check out the stories highlight. I'm not
yeah,
sure if I'm
check them out.
describing
I
it
mean,
well
there's so
enough.
many, but like I even just think about nonsense cues that I've heard throughout, and now that I've been a personal trainer for several years, I'm like, oh my goodness, that was the most ridiculous cue, and so anyway, that's fertile ground, and we could do another Instagram live someday that's just entirely about that because
Yeah.
there's so much stuff to talk about. But the main question I ask each of the warriors is at the very end, what to you is being a warrior? What does being a warrior mean to you? And I don't mean a Cure Grace warrior, because that's great, but showing up in your life as a warrior, what does that mean to you or look
Yeah.
like?
So I thought about this question, and my first impulse was, I don't know if I like the word warrior. So it invokes war and all of that and fighting. But the reality is that a lot of the things that life demands of us require kind of showing up to the battlefield,
Yeah.
so to speak. And I think a couple of things I've talked about really involve that, whether it's dealing with injury or looking at something as profoundly large and daunting as the climate crisis. And we absolutely have to be in the seat of the warrior, kind of metaphorically, to shift and move the needle in these ways. And the yogic perspective, this is what it came down to. The yogic perspective on being a warrior is like Arjuna on a battlefield.
Exactly.
Yeah. And knowing that all that we can control is how we show up
Yeah.
and whether we show up. We don't get to choose the outcome.
Mm-mm.
I don't get to choose the outcome for my patients, but I can show up armed with the best knowledge and the most recent evidence and the most enthusiasm and the most energy to, move the needle in their lived experience. And that, what happens with that is out of my hands. So that's what being a warrior means to me right now. Thank you for
Oh,
asking.
thank you so much. So I think we can all um, look to that as such a great example, Ariel, and just showing up. I think that, we do our best and we show up with what we have, what we're armed with. I think that it's important to be prepared, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you are a warrior for your patients. You're a warrior for yoga teachers that are out there. I think for anyone who wants to feel good in their body. And what a great warrior you really are. Honestly, I say that from my heart. And y'all, I gotta say that we're so lucky that we have Ariel as a warrior ambassador, and she's going to be teaching soon. And you should mark your calendar that she's going to be teaching on October 30th.
Yes.
Also, if you go to the Kira Grace website and or the YouTube channel, you'll see that we have all of the Rising Together videos up there from the last year and a half. And Ariel has quite a few that are up there. And some of them are about strengthening your posterior chain, which we all need because we sit all day long, most of us. So I want to put in a plug for that one. I think that's so important. She has a lot of offerings. Just stay tuned. She's definitely worthwhile and inspiring. And I know that I really enjoy your posts, and I look forward to the future having you on again.
I appreciate you, Lisa. Thank you. And we got to swap, or there's a one direction here. I need some curly hair tips. All I
Hey,
got is my braid.
hey. Oh, girl, we
Your
can
hair
talk.
looks stunning. It looks stunning. Maybe we can
Thank you.
get a whole IG video on that.
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah. Like
Yeah.
anyone's going to want to listen to me talk about that. But
Oh yes, I want.
we can
I'm signing
talk.
up. I already did.
Well,
Okay.
everyone have a wonderful day, and thank you
Yeah,
again,
thanks for
Ariel.
watching. Yeah, and for anybody watching, you can come take a class. I teach these by donation classes 3 times a week online. So there's that, which is a much lower barrier of entry than the mentorship.
Oh, yes, thank you. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Well, I'll have to take one of those classes soon as well. So thank you again,
Super
and
cool.
have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Bye, Lisa. I
Bye-bye.
appreciate you. Take care.
Mhm.